First of all, I'm mostly a farmer. I just need to get used to the technique here. Yeah, I'm not used to speak in front of such big audiences, as well as I'm not used to speak in English. So my English is like the English of a farmer, but I hope we'll come along with that. Yeah, my topic is a bit to give you another view on the whole topic from the biodynamic perspective. I'm very happy that all the speakers in front of me showed a lot of very, very nice pictures from detailed pictures of all the diversity in cover crops and flowers and small animals you can find. So I don't show you these pictures again. We are farmers. Usually most of us special wine farmers working in a monoculture. In German, farmer is translated with Landwirt. The translation of Land is clear, it's land. And Landwirt means, we are doing Landwirtschaft, so it's land economy. It's like using the land in the most economic way you can do. And I really don't like that. But the term Wirtschaft, you can also translate in German with a bit like a pub, like a small pub. That's a translation I like much more, because we are hosts for different cultures, different crops, different animals, if we think a little bit more in general in agriculture. So that could be a nice translation. In French, you have the word agriculture. That's much nicer, I think, because you see, we cultivate the landscape. So we farmers cultivate the landscape. We decide what it's looking like, if it's a monoculture or if it's a bit more diverse. It's our decision as the generality of farmers, of course, not only the few people here in this room. But that's in the same way the big task in front of us, to bring all the spirit, the motivation, the passion for biodiversity out of this room and spread the word in our communities where we're based, and make others work in this way. Yeah, and don't wait for any support from the government, just start with it. And if we just start, then we can talk about it. Yeah, that's a big rule in marketing, is just do good things and talk about them. And then you can make the customer pay for it. That's what we've seen in one of the presentations before. If people know that there's done some good things for biodiversity, they are willing to pay more for it. So we just need to start and talk about it. And then probably a lot of colleagues see that we can gain higher prices, and then they follow us and do something for biodiversity as well. That's just a few ideas up front. My first thing I want to tell you is when did biodynamic agriculture start? It was at Pentecost 1924 around. So the idea is around 100 years old. The situation was that synthetic nitrogen was developed, not because of any agricultural professor who said we need fertilizer for the crops or whatever. The reason to develop this synthesization of nitric was the war. The Germans, the bad Germans, invented it to win the war. Because you need nitric acid to produce TNT, to produce gunpowder, and so on. And after the First World War, in the peace contracts of Versailles, there was written, no weapon production, nothing in Germany. So they were not allowed to produce gunpowder, TNT, and so on from their big fabrics that they've built in that time. So the synthetic nutrition had to go somewhere, so they brought it to the fields. That made the farmers independent from their animals. Before, every farm, there was no specialized farms. Every farm had a herd of ruminants and animals, and they had to have some fields to feed them. They had to have some pasture where they can go. And with the manure from the animals, they could feed some other cultures, some grain, whatever. And then they took a part of the yield from the grain on the side, and they had their seeds for the next year. Also, the animals get more by themselves. So those farms were circles. They didn't need any input from outside. Of course, there was nothing you could sell them. They had enough of everything. With the independence from animal-based fertilization, there was the possibility to go more specialized on special cultures. So the farms got less diverse, but they had higher yields because the vigor was much higher with the synthetic fertilization. And then they needed to start spraying. But the quality of those higher yields was, of course, not the same than the one before. And that was the time when some big farmers asked the anthroposophic guy, Rudolf Steiner, for some ideas to get back to the quality they were used to. That was the invention of biodynamic viticulture. So, and coming back from that history, I'm coming from Pfalz. That's one of those landscapes that are not too steep, as Ilona told us in the morning. There's a really nice monocultural area. Pfalz is about 80 kilometers long and 3 kilometers wide. So it's 24,000 hectares, and every square meter is a grapevine, more or less. So the main reasons, I just began with that: independence from animal fertilization. You don't need to grow food for your animals anymore. You don't need the pasture for the animals anymore, so you can go a bit more specialized. But you still need it. If you were a poor farmer, you had a cow to work your cultures. If you were rich, you had a horse. But you still needed some food for them, and you still needed as well some pasture. But then you got tractors. So you were totally independent from the animals. And when everyone had a tractor, they wanted to use it, and the tractor got bigger with more horsepower. So you needed wider rows, and you didn't need all those walls in between. And though viticulture is the culture where you can make the most money, so everything else was removed. And then, of course, you didn't need all those apple trees and so on no more, and those fields you had in between, probably with some other vegetables, because you can buy everything in the supermarket now. So 100% monoculture, no diversity in the landscape, a big loss of all those habitats. So coming back to what I told you a bit before, what's the ideal of a biodynamic farm? We need, and this is a really tough task, to create a farm organism that doesn't need any input from outside. Especially if you grow traditional wine varieties, it's not possible at all because you need to spray them. But it's an ideal where we can work on and try to reduce everything. In a biodynamic farm, you have obligatory ruminants as the heart of the farm, but you need a good balance between animals with different orientations. That's a bit philosophical, probably, but we have animals that are orientated more into the air, like chickens who are originally birds. We have the ruminants who go more horizontal, and you have, for example, porks that search their food in the ground, not above the ground. So that's different orientations, and also you can work in different ways with the different manures. Yeah, in the past, there was much more knowledge about this. Experience knowledge, not scientific knowledge. But people knew if you want to give an impulse for root growing, it makes the most sense to fertilize with pork manure. Then the roots grow deeper because the pork has the impulse that it breaks the root in the upper soil, so they need to go deeper. If you want to have more, this fruit impulse, you needed a cow manure, and if you had a very cool soil, you could use more horse manure, for example, which is a much bigger heat impulse than the other ones. Yeah, of course, you needed to plant the food for your animals. You needed to have legumes for the fertility. Yeah, that's also a quite philosophical view, but the legumes do a collaboration with a bacteria and can condense cosmic nitrogen to living nitrogen. Yeah, it's kind of they take it from outside in the air and just put it into material. That's quite magic, I think. Yeah, you need the pasture for your animals, and then of course, forest is a part of a farm organism. Yeah, you had vines, fruit trees, whatever, some aquaculture, and in the 7th lecture of the agricultural course, Steiner tells you all this exactly, how to organize a farm organism to have everything in the right balance. And which found its manifestation in the Demeter certification rules was this here, jungle. We need now, in the Demeter International certification rules, you need 10% of the whole hectares you have need to be for biodiversity. I think that's the only organization that has a rule like this. To have a space, philosophical, be careful, where everything is allowed to be. Give 10% of your farm also for pests, for fungal diseases, for everything, where they are allowed to be. So they have no reason to go on your culture crops. It's a very philosophical idea. Practice is something different, mostly. But it's an idea where you also, in our farm, we have a part of the forests where there's sometimes there's ponds in it, where we leave just nature. We leave the fallen trees, etc., etc. So it's really a spot that helps a lot for the diversity that is coming out of that spot and spreads over the whole farm. Okay. You know, I'm not a professional PowerPoint presenter. Okay, the farm. Weingut-Odinstal. It's a really magical place. We're on this is an old basalt quarry, so we have a lot of volcanic stone. This is the house, and these are the vineyards. And then we have the meadow around, and all the forest here belongs to the farm. That's quite unique in our area, which is usually here, 3 kilometers, 80 kilometers. And usually around here, it's 200 meters altitude, wine curing stops, and then there's forest. And we are up on 350 meters altitude, surrounded by the forest, like an island up there. The eruption of the volcano break up the geology that was there before. It was the classical Trias geology in layers over each other, the sediments, sandstone, kalkstone, and then a heavy clay above. And this was broken up and made bam. And now we have totally different soil everywhere where the slope direction changes a little bit. We have here directly next to the quarry, there's volcanic basalt under the vines. Of course, here it's very poor, only soil like this, then there's the rocks. And down here we have much more soil above the rocks. Then we have here east slope the calc soil, and then more south slope is all the sandstone interrupted by this parcel, which has a very heavy clay under it. So there's already diversity in the vineyard, in the soils, and you see we have a lot of different structures. We have the forest, we have the vineyards, we have all the dry stone walls like here and here and here, also between the vineyards. Some of them are 3 or 4 meters high down here. And then we have stripes of trees and bushes in between, so it's very diverse. And the pastures are very, very poor. This means, in general, when you have poor pastures, you have high diversity. The same is in the vineyard. When the soil is very poor, you have a high diversity. When the soil is rich, you get a higher vigor, and at the end, the natural plants that grow there is only grass that take all the nutritions. That's a big topic for me nowadays, because with all those sustainable thinking, we're talking a lot about carbon dioxide balances, summaries. And when you have a low yield, because you have a poor soil, then you have a problem on the carbon footprint of your single bottle wine. Because yield is the biggest factor you have out in the field to reduce your carbon footprint. Because on the high yield, you can just divide all the input you have out there in the vineyard, can divide it through much more liters than when you have a low yield. That's a big problem I have with all those carbon footprints, because it works against the quality. And it also works against biodiversity when you have those soil nesting wild bees or soil breeding birds and so on. There needs to be some light on the soil. Otherwise, they would not make their buildings there. If we have a vigorous meadow or pastry, they're not there. So it's not all about carbon footprints. So we have all those different habitats with the vineyards, mainly seeded cover crops. But I'll come to that later because we stopped that. But of course, there's a lot of the seeds from the last years also left. And this is already a nice habitat for all the insects, bees, cultured ones, and wild ones. Of course, there's birds building their nests in the vine stocks and so on. Then we have the dry stone walls where we find a lot of amphibians, lizards, grass snakes. But the grass snakes you only find when you have some water somewhere. We have down here in the quarry, there's a big water reservoir, which is probably a bit too far away, and this is 140 meters to go up. So the snakes from those walls don't go down here. But here next to the house, we have a plant cleaning system, because out here we have no canalization. So there's a little pond where all the used water is just ready to be transpirated. So there's some water around. There's also a pond in this little forest here. So we have the water in the diversity of the habitats. Yeah, with mice, a lot of with the weasels who eat the mice, amazing bees, etc. With the pasture, which is, as I said, very, very poor, and but we have a cooperation to keep some cows there. There's of course living deers, rabbits, wild boars, insects, and if you have a poor pasture in high diversity, you find, of course, very seldom plants, and then you find specialists under the insects who can only live on those seldom plants. With some of the forest is quite wild, and we let it develop like a jungle, like whatever it wants. But then we also put some of parts of the forest into the fence and develop a totally new ecosystem there. Which was there 100 years ago, but the forest didn't deliver enough grass that people went on with this system. But you can also use the forest as a pasture, and then you get grass under the trees. That's very interesting to see that development. And we have, of course, the quarry with all the wall and the water, and yeah, the pond of the cleaning system. So when I started there, the farm was already organic. It was in 2004 I started, but the former owners of the farm, they already converted the farm to organic viticulture before there was certification. So I think they started end of the 80s, and the vineyards are certified organic since 1992. And it was totally sad that we will go on organic, but in 2006 we started to go biodynamic because we changed our mind a bit, and that brought a lot of changes in the thinking. We were rethinking the production circles because the ideal of a biodynamic farm is that you don't need any input from outside. That's a big basic. Reduce the input from outside everywhere where it's possible. Which is, if you relate it to wine, it's probably the most consequent terroir idea you can have. Because if you have no input from outside, the taste is only from the place and not from things you add from outside. Not only in the vineyard, also a lot in the cellar. We started to be very consequent in spontaneous fermentation, spontaneous malo. We started just to see the fermentation temperature as a part of the vintage character, because when you pick the grapes very late, they come in a cellar which is much cooler than when you pick early or when you have an earlier ripening vintage. We are on 350 meters in our region. We are on the border of wine growing. When I began there, people were laughing at me and said, "You can't work there. The grapes don't get ripe up there." Just to have a connection about the climatic conditions up there. Meanwhile, we're probably the biggest winner of global warming, even if it's a shame to be a winner of this shit. Yeah, also in the cellar, we decided, temperature is temperature. No intervention on the temperature, no on the fermentation. And also we started to add whole bunches into our white wines, because we wanted to have a tannin structure in the wines which comes from our place, from our terroir, from our farm individuality, and not from a wooden barrel, from a special wood, from a special region, in a special toasting. That's not authenticity, that's winemaking. It's okay, when you're a winemaker, you have an idea what your wine should taste like, then you need to do everything. If the sugar is too low, you chaptalize. If it's too high, you add water. If acidity is too high, you add calc. If it's too low, you add acid, and you take away the wrong tannins and add the right tannins, and so on. You can do that, but that's not our approach. We want to bring into the bottle maximum authenticity and not a wine that appears in our head. Yeah, we started composting. We started bringing animals back to the field, and for composting, we of course needed cooperation. So we now have a cooperation, local cooperations, with one of the last guys in our region who keeps cows. He's one of the only guys in the region who doesn't make wine. And so he brings us a little herd of charolais for the summer month when we have enough grass on the fields around the vineyards. We don't want to add there any food, because then you get more vigor and a loss of diversity on the pasture. That's why they are only there from end of May to end of October, around that. And then we do the sales of the meat. We slaughter the charolais when they are around 1 year. Main reason is the weight. Then half an animal slaughtered, finished, is around 100 kilogram. That's a big portion. When they get older, it's even more, but that's the smallest portion we sell. If you buy meat from Odinstal, you need to work nose to tail. We don't make an auction around the fillet and to keep the bones because nobody wants them. If a restaurant in our region wants to have meat from us, they work with a whole animal. That's very important for us. That's very uncommon in Germany. I'm always happy when I come to France and see a bigger selection of special things from the animal in the restaurant lists. Yeah, as well, we have a cooperation with a beekeeper. We integrated some chickens that go to the vineyard mainly together with the sheep. And we put sheep in the vineyards after harvest, just grassing there and taking what is left. Yeah, animals have soul life. That's a big difference from plant. The next step to the animals is that they have soul, and I think it's a total different when I look out of the window and there's only grass. That's one thing, but if there's just one cow or a deer or whatever, the whole atmosphere is totally different because of the presence of the soul of this animal. That's it changes completely the atmosphere when we have there's a few months in the after grassing the vineyards with the sheep, and before the cows come back, there's a few months without ruminants where we have a totally different atmosphere in the farm. It's much nicer when we have the ruminants up there. Okay. We started using the vineyards as pasture. I already said this. We fertilize with forces. That's the voodoo thing around biodynamic. Don't need to go deeper in that today. Last year we planted more than 30 fruit trees. We already have some, but yeah, the important thing is that you go more diverse, is that you also reach the aim to gain some money. And with a few apple trees, we developed a new product a few years ago, which is like a pet nut cidre. And this is working very, very, very well. So we're searching someone who works with old varieties on apples, and now we have, I think it's 30 different varieties and different rootstocks, old ones, to increase this production, and also to make more habitants, more flowering offers in the early spring, and a bit more possibilities also for the bats to live. And another thing is to work in a closer circle also made us see which amounts of sulfur and copper can be replaced with plant teas that from plants that grow around our fields, stinging nettles, horsetail, ivy, willow. So we use all that, and in the same way we use that, we reduce the amount of copper and sulfur. And another thing is we stop turning the soil and only work with direct seedings. That's very important for us. And we also stopped mowing in the season. We never spray insecticides because we have a very good stock of bats, of insects that damage the other insects. So we never spray insecticides. And I think it's a big problem when you have a nice offer of a lot of flowers in every second row or in every row for all the insects. They're more or less like in food paradise. When you mow it down, from one day to the other, they suffer hunger. So all the population will go totally down, especially the one that were in the mowing machine. So we never mow during the vegetation, only after the vegetation, the sheep mow. And in the winter, then we just mow to cut the old wood a bit smaller from the vines. And so we also have, it's the same on the pasture when you use the meadow and you mow it. It's the same. And when you grass there, you always have some flowers in between, and they're not destroyed all at the same moment. So it's very useful for the insects and wild bees and so on. A little bit, because it's kind of a holy thing in biodynamics, is the cow shit. And this is really a magical thing. Sorry. Yeah. Because this really creates diversity, a lot of diversity. The dung beetles that live in here and fly out, they're a big part of what special kinds of bats eat. And there's about 40 different dung beetles. In average, there's 50 beetles per portion of cow dung. And it's a totally different thing when you have cow dung, which is from your place, one time through the cow, and then fallen off. That's totally different than fertilizing with cow dung from another place. There's a long story about this topic, why it's also important if you work biodynamic and spray the preparation 500 with this, which is the horn manure, why it should be your own one, or at least from the region, because there's special forces from the region, because the cow eats up what the region offers. And then there's, you don't need the forces from somewhere else, you need the forces from your own place. That's very interesting. The dung from one cow feeds about 200 frogs, 25 starlings, 13 storks. I think that's really a big thing for biodiversity. One portion of dung is a habitat for about 100 species and up to 4,000 individuals. Yeah? Diversity, not only what we see above the soil, also under the soil. And we don't do that for too long time with the sheep, but we also realize that the soil eats up the leaves that fall down much faster, because there's a lot more activity and a lot more warmness, and so the activity of the soil is much bigger when you have the dung of the ruminants there. And you also have more worms, more insects. So you have the food that the next animal needs. You have more birds. And we also had less problems with the budworms in spring, because we have more birds there, and they don't focus totally on the sheep dung. They also eat by accident the worms they find around on the vines. Less deers in spring, because the deers have very sensible noses, and when you have still the smell of the sheep, and the wool still is on the vine stalks, on the wires, and so on, because they sometimes they feel like, and they go to the vine stalk because they have no other sheep to scratch them, and that's very interesting. And we also have less mice, because we have. On one hand, better conditions for the birds to get the mice, and on the other hand, the sheep walking around destroy the roads and the nests of the mice. Yeah. So I think that's the most I wanted to tell you. Just in between, I think we've seen a lot of wild animals for biodiversity. We didn't see that much cultivated animals so far, but they also create biodiversity, and that's when you start rethinking production cycles and think about how to get back animals into the farms. This is not an animal. It's a bee orchidee, which you can only find when you have very poor meadows, and we don't want to fertilize this away. My last slide. Thanks for your attention.